At the top of Diamond Mountain, a wonderfully theatrical radio tycoon collected us in a Steyr-Puch Pinzgauer, the Austrian military utility vehicle. Its narrow, flat-nosed cab sat over the front wheels. A canvas canopy covered the passenger compartment, but the rear opening itself was uncovered. We sat on benches inside with two Portuguese water dogs as the road narrowed. Then huge steel doors opened in the side of the mountain, not straight into the wine cave, but into a dugout courtyard. Inside that courtyard, Fred Constant walked to an ordinary-looking door, turned to us and said, "This is my back door." That separate door opened into his wine cave. And somehow, that was only the third strangest thing that happened that weekend.
The story began 1 week earlier with an email that seemed to erase the trip. We had visited Napa and Sonoma many times, but never on an organised tour. This time we wanted something deliberately excessive, a private Diamond Mountain Day, not a tasting room carousel. Lynn Durling of Artisan Wine Tours had created a remarkable itinerary, V Madrone, Andrew Geoffrey, Constant, and lunch on the mountain. Months after signing the agreement, we wrote to confirm. The reply was that the company was no longer operating.
At the time, we knew only that our carefully planned day appeared to have vanished. We later understood that Lynn had also been ill, something we had not known then. That matters. He was not the villain of this story. His business disappeared, but his curatorial imagination survived it. 3 years later, we wrote to him again because that itinerary had been so good. A great itinerary is a form of authorship, and Lynn had already written an unlikely 3-act play.
Poetry Inn rescued the production. We were staying in its 5-room eyrie above the Stag's Leap district, then closely tied to Cliff Lede Vineyards. We called, explained the collapse, and sent the itinerary. The staff contacted every estate. The appointments were real, they were still confirmed. Poetry Inn found a driver, and the supposedly ruined trip came back to life. The inn's foggy valley views, fireplaces, terraces, breakfast, candy bars, and granola felt luxurious. But its finest amenity was competence under pressure.
The route itself explained the day. We began above the fog near Stag's Leap, crossed towards St. Helena, stopped at V Madrone on Highway 29, and then climbed the western wall of Napa Valley into the Diamond Mountain District. These were working agricultural roads, not broad boulevards built for tasting room traffic. Appointment-only hospitality was partly intimacy and partly geography. Steep slopes, small sites, narrow access, and very little room for a parade of rental cars.
Our first hosts were Chris and Pauline Tilley, the founders of V Madrone Cellars. Chris had grown up in Napa, spent much of his career in insurance and finance in New York, met Dublin-born Pauline there, and eventually returned west. Pauline brought an unmistakably Irish warmth and wit to the table. Their property incorporated the remains of an 1887 ghost winery. They restored the site, planted roughly 3.5 acres of Cabernet Sauvignon, and opened their public-facing winery only a few years before our visit.
Chris explained the years hidden inside a finished bottle. Buying land, securing permissions, clearing and restoring a neglected site, planting vines, waiting for young vines to mature, establishing winemaking, and finally opening the doors. The dates do not form a neat 10-year march from purchase to first vintage. The truth is more interesting. He described the entire undertaking as a process measured, not in seasons, but in years. Years during which patience also accrued carrying costs.
Before that morning, waiting for wine meant leaving a bottle in the cellar. Chris introduced us to the advanced version: purchase land, negotiate with agencies, rehabilitate an old winery, plant Cabernet, and keep writing checks while nature observes no deadline. The wine was delicious. But conversation changed what it represented. A bottle stopped being merely fermented grape juice. It became compressed bureaucracy, farming risk, deferred gratification, and a remarkable willingness to wait for strangers to taste the result.
V Madrone taught the first lesson. Wine is a long bet. The property was sold in 2017 and became the home of AXR Napa Valley, with the V Madrone name and legacy continuing for a time. The building in our photograph is the same building visitors see at AXR today. A name can change, while the physical place remains remarkably recognizable. The patient work stays embedded in the vineyard. That is one reason founder stories make bottles emotionally durable. Long after a label leaves the market, the years behind it remain legible.
Then the road began to climb. Diamond Mountain's Napa-facing slopes rise through volcanic ash, tough, fractured rock, and fast-draining soils. Water runs away quickly. Roots work, berries stay small. Access gets complicated. The federally recognized Diamond Mountain District lies on the Napa side of the ridge, even when an estate's broader property crosses towards Sonoma. At elevation, the valley can disappear beneath fog while the vines remain in sun. Beautiful scenery, yes, but also a diagram of why mountain farming costs more.
At Andrew Geoffrey Vineyards, there was no ceremonial porte cochere. There was a small roadside pullout and Peter Thompson waiting with lunch. You could not see the deck from the road. Together, we carried several coolers and the wine up a steep wooded trail. That shared work erased the normal distance between proprietor and guest. The tasting room was a rustic 3-level wooden deck Peter had built into the hillside. At the time, this was a vineyard, not an on-site winery. The wines were made elsewhere. The hospitality happened right there.
Peter grilled tri-tip and vegetables. It may have been our first tri-tip. He opened bottle after bottle, and the scheduled tasting expanded into a long lunch above Napa Valley. Peter was a San Diego attorney who first visited Napa as a college student in 1973. He began seriously looking for vineyard land in 1992. After roughly 2.5 years, he bought an undeveloped 66-acre Diamond Mountain property in 1995, a steep puzzle of forest, brush, chaparral, rock, erosion control, and ambition.
The vineyard sits near the summit at around 2,000 feet. Cabernet Sauvignon dominates, supported by Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. Peter named Andrew Geoffrey for his 2 sons, and family drawings helped inspire the label. He was also among the small group involved in establishing the Diamond Mountain District appellation in 2001. In Peter's telling, this was a long-held dream that survived legal work, saving, searching, difficult land, and a personal life that eventually redirected him north toward the vineyard.
This was the emotional center of the trip. Constant would be more operatic. Andrew Geoffrey was more intimate. No marble, no scripted flight, no branded charcuterie board arranged by committee. A man carried coolers up his mountain, cooked lunch, poured wine, and told 2 strangers why the vineyard bore his sons' names. Luxury usually advertises distance from ordinary labor. Peter's version placed the labor directly in our hands, then fed us from it.
The rarest luxury was access to a person's time. We returned to Andrew Geoffrey several times while living in California and introduced friends to Peter and the vineyard. After moving to Pennsylvania, we kept buying the wines. The visit did not end with the expected case purchase. It created advocates. Some tastings sell a case. The best become traditions. A bottle opened thousands of miles away could bring back the climb, the grill, the deck, and the view in a single pour.
The original deck, we remember, was later lost in the 2020 glass fire, along with vineyard infrastructure. A new and more elaborate deck was built nearby. Our later photographs show the change. The setting is more polished, the view just as startling, the welcome still personal. Andrew Geoffrey remains Andrew Geoffrey, still associated with Peter Thompson. The stage changed, the relationship did not. Fire made the old lunch irretrievable, but it also revealed why photographs of an apparently ordinary afternoon matter.
At Constant Diamond Mountain Vineyard, subtlety left the vehicle. We called from a large gate. Fred Constant announced that he would come down. He arrived in a Steyr-Puch Pinzgauer, narrow, flat-nosed, exceptionally high off the ground, and built for military terrain. A canvas canopy covered the passenger compartment, while the rear remained open. We climbed aboard and sat on its interior benches beside 2 Portuguese water dogs for the ascent. Freddie had made his fortune in radio station ownership. He was theatrical, opinionated, generous, and utterly certain of his standards. the most wonderfully pompous northeastern man imaginable, meant affectionately and with admiration.
The first stop was a beautifully restored farmhouse. Freddie told us that when he first brought his wife, Mary, known as Connie, to the neglected property, the washer and dryer were sitting on the porch. In his telling, she asked how he expected her to live like that. By our visit, the former working farmhouse had become an immaculate guest house. This was Freddie's version of the romance. Mary would later explain the invoice.
Back in the truck, we climbed higher. Freddie pressed a garage door remote. Huge metal doors opened in the mountainside and led into a dugout courtyard. The truck entered that courtyard. Only then did Freddie indicate a separate, very ordinary door set inside it. "This is my back door." Beyond that door was the wine cave, barrels, aging bottles, a tunnel, and a spiral staircase rising directly into the kitchen. We crossed the house, stepped outside, and entered a glass tasting room. Then the property revealed itself in layers: pavilion, infinity pool, steep vines, pond, and the valley beyond.
Fred and Mary bought the neglected property in 1993. The estate eventually stretched across parts of Napa and Sonoma counties, though only the Napa portion lay within the official Diamond Mountain District. What they built was unusually ambitious: vineyard, cave, equipment, architecture, and advice selected with an appetite for the finest available version. The spectacle can distract from the point, so it is worth saying plainly, we genuinely loved the Constant wines. The ambition was visible in the glass.
Freddie held court. He told us that Robert Parker had once reviewed a wine he said Parker could not possibly have received, beginning a feud that lasted years. On a later visit, Freddie reported that peace had been restored. We have not found an independent account, so this remains Freddie's story and is more entertaining for being told in his voice. Later, we heard from neighboring wineries that legend had it Fred would drive his Porsche at very high speed down Diamond Mountain's winding roads, scaring everybody half to death. That was not a story Freddie told us, and we cannot independently verify it. Freddie performed his own stories. His neighbors supplied some of the legend.
Then came the olive oil. Mary wanted to make it. Freddie handed us a bottle, which we thought was fabulous, and described the economics as a classic business school case. Roughly $84 to produce, sold for $48. The precise figures are remembered, not audited. The lesson was unmistakable. Freddie had discovered the quickest route from agriculture to a small fortune. Begin with a much larger one. It was funny because he understood the joke and poured the evidence anyway.
Fred died from cancer in 2014 at 72. On a later visit, we met Mary gardening beside the house, quieter and more understated than Freddie. She described the economics from the other side. Freddie chose the most expensive bottles, corks, equipment, and consultants. He pursued the finest version of everything and, in her telling, spent a fortune doing it. Freddie's story was the romance of perfection. Mary's story was the invoice. Together they made the estate intelligible.
Constant taught the third lesson. Passion and rationality are not always traveling companions. Some landmarks exist because somebody refuses to optimize the dream. The result can be beauty, great wine, terrible margins, and a story no efficient spreadsheet could produce. Mary continued stewarding the estate after Fred's death and sold it in 2016. The buyers were members of a family from China. A published property history describes the estate as their wedding present. Constant was renamed Diamond Mountain Vineyard, and Mary remains associated with the winery even after the sale. The sale also belongs to a broader Napa pattern, best described as trophy or lifestyle winery ownership. Wealthy buyers acquiring an extraordinary place to live with, entertain in, and steward, not simply a conventional visitor business. The phrase does not mean the wine is unserious. It means the estate itself is part of the aspiration. The name on the gate changed, but the fog, steep vines, and magnificent impracticality of the site remained.
The next morning returned us to quiet. Breakfast above the fog at Poetry Inn, followed by Cliff Lede Vineyards. Because the inn was connected to the winery, We received especially warm treatment. In 2011, the tasting room felt comparatively conventional after Freddie's Cave and Infinity Pool finale. Yet music was already embedded in the place. Cliff Lede, a Canadian construction executive associated with the lead core business, had acquired the former S. Anderson property in 2002 and rebuilt it with considerable intent.
Architect Howard Backen redesigned the winery, and viticulturist David Oubre assisted with vineyard redevelopment. The blocks received names drawn from songs and albums, My Generation, Moondance, Dark Side of the Moon, instead of living only as numbers. Selected blocks could be blended into limited rock block series mashups, turning vineyard composition into something like musical arrangement. The identity later expanded through art and the backstage experience, but the seed was already visible during our visit.
The tasting culminated with Poetry Cabernet Sauvignon, grown on the steep Poetry Vineyard below the inn. At that time, we were primarily Cabernet drinkers. The conclusion felt perfectly circular. Vineyard below the room, wine in the glass, inn above the fog. Poetry remains a flagship Cabernet, and Cliff Lede continues under its original name. Our tastes later expanded into many grapes, regions, and styles. A great winery visit can open a door rather than complete a journey.
The inn itself has changed. The former Poetry Inn now operates as Steyr-Puch Estate. That update is more than a correction on a title card. It captures the larger truth of Napa. Ownership changes, brands evolve, fires redraw buildings, and hospitality adopts new language. The view can remain almost eerily familiar, while the institution around it becomes something else. Then and now is not a verdict. It is simply the rhythm of a living agricultural place.
We began the weekend looking for an over-the-top wine tour and found one, but not for the reasons we expected. The exclusivity was not the gate, military truck, infinity pool, or cave beneath the kitchen. It was sitting with people who had risked years of their lives to make these places real. Chris and Pauline taught us how long a bottle can take. Peter showed us that hospitality is personal. Freddie and Mary revealed both the romance and the bill for perfection.
The wines followed us home. Andrew Geoffrey and Constant appeared at our table beside other Napa favourites. We brought friends back to the mountain. After moving across the country, we continued ordering bottles. This is what an emotionally durable wine does. It stores more than fruit, tannin, and vintage. It stores a founder's cadence, a grill's smoke, dogs bouncing in a truck, a fog bank below the vines, and the absurd satisfaction of entering a house through a cave.
Today, visits to these properties require fresh confirmation and reservations. The private access we experienced in 2011 should not be treated as a promise available now. But the mountain still teaches the same fundamentals. Volcanic soils drain quickly, steep slopes complicate every task, narrow roads limit traffic, small vineyards concentrate risk, and time is the main ingredient no winemaker can purchase later. Diamond Mountain makes intimacy feel glamorous because the terrain first makes scale difficult.
The names on some gates have changed. One deck burned and was rebuilt. One founder is gone. The former Poetry Inn has a new name. We moved from California to Pennsylvania, and our cellar grew far beyond Cabernet. But we returned, brought friends, and kept buying the wines. The tour company disappeared before the trip even began. Somehow, the trip itself never ended.